BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. And just a couple of quick announcements before we begin. The first is that this channel is now back on schedule, and I'm hoping that the episodes will come out regularly. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday. Wednesdays are currently devoted to the New Orleans Axeman, another unidentified serial killer mystery, and there will be about 2 episodes left in that series. Then I will be restarting the story of the Phantom Killer, an unidentified serial killer from Texarkana in 1946. And of course there is the Anything Goes Friday segment where any subject is fair game. And on the weekends I've been doing a bonus episode about the Moraga connection to the Zodiac Killer mystery. It started out first just called Zodiac Killer New Discovery, the Moraga Letters, looking at some correspondences that may have been written by the Zodiac Killer of the 1960s, but now it's really evolved into a giant series of its own, talking about a lot of theoretical observations in the case made by an individual who uses the YouTube name Sphere the Cube, also known as Sphery. But in this episode, I would first like to give a shout out to Batman, that's right, Bruce Wayne himself, and he shared a couple things with me about possible either Zodiac inspirations or more like cultural elements, I think would be the best way to put it. The Zodiac Killer mailed a card on October 27th of 1970 that is perhaps his most famous card, although that's arguable, and it was the Halloween card sent to Paul Avery, the reporter, although his name was misspelled Paul Averly, there was an extra L inserted in there. And the Halloween card said, "I know you ache to know my name, but then why spoil the game like bone ache?" And it has 2 skeletons on it. One of them was pasted on, and there's another skeleton that has a pumpkin on it that was pasted on. And because it's now November, I was talking about the Halloween card a lot in October, and Bruce sent me something that had not exactly an identical copy, but a similar one from the time. Then that goes to show you that in terms of searching for meanings and clues in the artwork, is it possible that these things were very commonplace and easily available for purchase? Because the card that Bruce sent me has a posable novelty skeleton that can be shaped into different positions, although this one is 3-dimensional, but it is hanging from the front of the Halloween card, and on the inside it does have another very similar message. Again, not identical text, and absolutely neither Bruce nor I are insinuating that the Zodiac Killer was ever in possession of this specific card, but it goes to show you that these things were popular, available in stores, and a lot of people have been spending their entire lifetime trying to find out the clues in the different cards that the Zodiac mailed, such as the Peek Through the Pines card or the 13-hole punch card. And I've read off numerous proposed solutions over the last several Zodiac Killer news reports, which I invite you guys to listen to. You can also subscribe, hit the like button, share with your friends and family on social media if they're into true crime cases. And another great way to support all of these efforts is to go over to BuyMeACoffee.com. There's a link to that in the description box. This allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Mondays. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on BBOR. But back to the Halloween card, I think that there's also a response that was written by Tom Voigt, just here in the comment section on Black Box Online Radio, that needs to be reiterated. When Tom Voigt has examined the documents firsthand and wanted to share something with the BBOR audience, that the skeleton on the Halloween card was not drawn on, meaning the one that is on the inside. It was a novelty skeleton that was pasted on, that was meant to be positioned so it's hanging from the spider web, and that's casting some doubt on the deeper meanings that could be placed on this type of artwork. I mean, was it positioned in a specific way, or was it simply just meant to be posed so it looks like it's hanging from the spider web, and just that's all there is to it? And I think that this thing that Bruce has shared with me is going to kind of lean toward that hypothesis. Now, I'm not saying I know 100%. Absolutely, I do not. There could be very, very precise meanings that are contained in the artwork, or it could be something as simple as somebody put this stuff on to look creepy, and that's the end of it. And I'm leaning toward the latter, but always keeping an open mind, and I'll be discussing different solutions to the Zodiac Killer's artwork and different theories and hypotheses in the future. Now, moving on to the next thing, I am now also in the possession of a book called Secrets with Ciphers and Codes. The Zodiac didn't only write letters and cards, he also wrote his cryptograms, the ciphers, which perhaps are some of the most famous Zodiac Killer creations. There are 4 confirmed ciphers: the Z408, the Z340, the Z13, and the Z32. They get their names because of the numbers of symbols in them. And there are also additional things like perhaps the cipher that's found on the Fairfield letter, that's an unconfirmed communication. And then there's the Z18 code, which is the final line of the 408 cipher. But I would like to look at something in this book, Secret with Ciphers and Codes by Joel Rothman and Ruth Van Tremaine. I just opened this thing to the first page, and I'm going to read some text to you guys. Secrets with Ciphers and Codes. There are many ways to conceal a communication, from vanishing ink in foreign languages to secret codes and ciphers that only the sender and the receiver know. Technically, a quote-unquote code replaces a word with a new word or symbol, while a cipher replaces each letter with a symbol. Generally, though, in this book, a code can be any system for disguising a message. The study of codes and ciphers is called cryptology. The first code most people learn to use, and they learn it as a child, is Pig Latin. It rearranges words and makes them sound ridiculous. For the words beginning with consonants, the consonants are moved to the end of the word and followed by the sound A. Speak this code in English becomes Ixpe iste odice in Pig Latin. If a word begins with a vowel sound, way is added to the end of the word. Honest Abe becomes Honest Way Abe Way. And I thought that this was really interesting because to those of you who have followed the Moraga Letters episode, that all started because I first discovered a post online from Spheri, who has created the source material for that series, and the first thing I learned about him was he had proposed a solution to the Z18 code, which used Pig Latin, and I've never discussed this exact book with Spheri, but I mean, I just turned to the first page. This is actually page 5 in the book, minus the things like the title page and such, and it says the most basic code that people learn is Pig Latin, and Spheri's solution to the Z18 code is the tip, "Hi, I'm Robert," meaning that the Zodiac Killer's first name was Robert, and Spheri has a Zodiac Killer suspect named Robert Volvins. And I believe, I mean, almost certainly I would say I know, Spheri is the first person to introduce Robert Volvins as a Zodiac Killer suspect. Now, this also talks about some additional layers to Pig Latin in the book that says, I've got a secret becomes, I got a secret can be encoded by using the egg sound in place of every vowel sound. And I've got a secret becomes egiv, gegat, ega, segre, gregret. And either system is easy to learn, and with practice, you can become fluent and speak it swiftly to the confusion of untrained ears and unwanted listeners. Now, this thing about the egg, I've never heard that that was actual Pig Latin before. I thought that that was something that's similar to G-Speak. Back in 2020, during the lockdowns, I got on Paramount Plus and I found the first two seasons of Frasier. Yeah, that's right, the sitcom with Kelsey Grammer. And I watched those in somewhat of a ridiculous binge-watching fashion. And they talked about something called G-Speak, which sounds very similar to this, except it was that you insert a G into a to each syllable in the words. Like, so if you have a one syllable word like speak, you're gonna have spageek. It's going to insert that G sound. G speak would be gaji spageek, and this sounds much more similar to that. I've never heard inserting the word egg in place of every vowel sound. Egiv gagat ega sigret, and it's definitely not the most pleasant thing to hear on the ears. But could Pig Latin have been an inspiration for the Zodiac Killer's ciphers or Z18 codes? I mean, this is a code book from the 1960s, and on page 5, it's talking about using Pig Latin, so I definitely will give some credit to Suri about that, although he has not come without criticism for introducing that solution in Pig Latin, Ibtre, Utre, Obitre, the tip, hi, I'm Robert, because the people who are challenging him on that are simply saying that the Z18 is most likely either a mistake or it has no precise meaning, and it's not meant to reveal any exact name. It's an error on the part of the cryptographer, but always approaching things with an open mind and want to try and find out where things could lead us. For those of you who did not hear the most recent episode that's coming out on the weekends, I would like to expand upon one point that was discussed in there, and that was the 1974 murder of Christy Gross from the state of Wyoming. And this is a crime that Fury has tried to connect to the Zodiac killer. And no matter what, I think that it goes without saying that not only is the Zodiac suspect list growing, but the amount of possible Zodiac crimes is constantly growing. And in some ways, I do not believe that that is the best thing because it's turning into something that people can't even keep track of. Last year, I did an episode on the channel Horizon Eye Productions called The World of the Zodiac Killer 50 Years of Terror, where I made an attempt to document all the possible Zodiac crimes, not all of them, but as many as I could think of firsthand. But as we see, they're going to be constantly people are trying to connect the Zodiac killer mystery to a new set of homicides or bizarre assaults, or maybe even some things like wildfires, I kid thee not, that can come up from time to time. But I wanted to talk about this one because it's going to involve a suspect that is connected to some other Zodiac activity, and I would like to introduce this story by going to an article from KingFM.com called "Who Committed the Rollins Rodeo Murders," written by Rick Rodham, just citing the source. Wyoming's most infamous unsolved mystery. In the summer of 1974, the small town of Rollins, Wyoming, was shocked by a series of murders. On July 4th, two 19-year-old girls turned up missing after attending the Little Britches Rodeo. The following month, a 15-year-old girl mysteriously vanished. 3 weeks later, a 10-year-old girl was abducted from the Carbon Country Rodeo. 4 missing girls in 7 weeks confirmed the town's worst fear. A serial killer was on the loose. 9 years after the crimes, the body of Christy Gross, who had been visiting her friend in Rollins for Independence Day, was discovered outside of Sinclair, Wyoming. Although the bodies of the other three girls have yet to be found, authorities have classified their cases as homicides. And even though I would agree with the first part of that statement, I also agree with the second part. I don't have any proof of that, but my gut instinct tells me that yes, indeed, these are homicides. Some believe notorious murderer Ted Bundy may be responsible for the crimes. Bundy has been tied to dozens of killings in Utah and Colorado during the 1970s, leading many to believe that he was involved. Perhaps the most likely suspect is a man named Royal Russell Long. Long was a truck driver who lived near Rollins at the time of the crimes. Long was also a suspect in the murder of two Oklahoma girls in the 1980s, but was never formally charged. He suffered a fatal heart attack in 1992 while serving time in a Wyoming prison for the kidnapping and assault of two girls in South Dakota. Although the case remains unsolved, the trail hasn't gone completely cold. In fact, one investigator recently launched an effort to tie Long to the murders using DNA. Sadly, having only discovered one of the four victims, it made it difficult to gather evidence. And to provide some additional info about the murder of Christy Gross, she was not originally from Wyoming. She was there for the rodeo, the Little Britches Rodeo, as you heard, and that's also why they call these the Rawlins Rodeo murders. But she is the only victim to have been discovered, and she died from two blunt force strikes to the back of the head. And this is, of course, very different than the Zodiac killer. The Zodiac killer committed the first confirmed crime by gun, the second one by gun, the third one was committed by knife, and the final crime, the murder of Paul Stein, was committed by gun as well. The Zodiac killer also mailed that Halloween card that I talk about. It's most famous for a reason, where it said by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, and it didn't necessarily talk about striking victims with blunt force. And I've been very critical of people who try to connect the Zodiac to another crime, the murder of Joan Webster from 1981, where the victim was killed with blunt force trauma to the back of the head as well, because I was like, that's just very inconsistent with anything that the Zodiac had done previously. And Spheri has reasons why he zones in on Robert Volvins for this particular crime, because, I mean, I don't want to share too much of his unpublished material, but Robert Volvins did have a history with abusing women, for lack of a better term, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So it's somewhat of an explanation about why the Zodiac would target lone females, because if you look at the confirmed crimes that I was just talking about, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and the Stein murder, in all of those, one of the commonalities is a lone female was not targeted. And this is one of the reasons why I don't believe the Zodiac murdered Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, because the same, it's like a vicious encounter with a lone female, and that it's possible that Sherry Jo Bates' car was disabled because some guy wanted to get her attention and then walk her either maybe to his vehicle or perhaps to a different location, and that she got scared and then they got into a fight and that she was stabbed multiple times. I mean, we won't really know 100% until there's some type of DNA breakthrough in the Bates case, or there is some type of conclusive evidence, maybe even a deathbed confession. But I'm noticing an enormous amount of differences between these attacks on lone females and the crimes that were committed by the Zodiac killer, because the Zodiac is mostly about targeting people that are in some type of defenseless state so that he can run away and then take credit for it later on. With the Bates murder in 1966, it is true that a letter was mailed about a month later that said he's taking credit for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, but then it says, "Beware, I'm stalking your girls now," paying specific attention to targeting lone females. Again, the Zodiac killer did not do that. But there's another reason, though, why I wanted to talk about this subject, because when I was reading an article about the Rawlins Rodeo murders in Wyoming, I came across that name, Royal Russell Long, and I knew I remembered it from somewhere because I've talked about him on Black Box Online Radio before, but there are now more than 1,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio, and I wanted to discuss this with you guys just so I could get a refresher on the subject. And I was trying to pinpoint the exact episode, and it wasn't until I saw a photo of him that I remembered that Royal Russell Long is also a suspect in another possible Zodiac crime, and that is the 1982 murder of Carolyn Eaton in Arizona. Carolyn Eaton was an unidentified person for many years. She was named Valentine Sally by the authorities. They didn't want to give her the name Jane Doe, which is so commonly used. They wanted to just add a little bit of humanity to it, so they called her Valentine Sally because she was found on Valentine's Day. But we have since learned that she was identified via DNA as Carolyn Eaton, and she was murdered by most likely suffocation. It's possible that she was strangled, although her hyoid bone wasn't broken, so they believe that she was actually smothered in the back of a sleeper cab of an 18-wheeler truck and then dragged by her belt loops to a place in the desert, and then she was found as her body was decomposing, but not excessively. Carolyn Eaton was last seen alive with a man whom CNN, the Zodiac News Network, proposes was Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect in the Zodiac case. And they are saying that Arthur Lee Allen was a prolific serial killer. He not only committed the Zodiac crimes, but perhaps crimes in Riverside, maybe the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings as proposed by Robert Graysmith, and the 1982 murder of Carolyn Eaton. And as I said, the suspect list is always getting bigger and bigger. But Royal Russell Long is an alternative suspect for not only the murder of Carolyn Eaton, but as you heard, the murder of Christy Gross and maybe the abduction of those other 3 girls in Wyoming. So I wanted to read something about him, and this is from Real Life Villains. Royal Russell Long was an American criminal who has been charged in some young women's disappearances. He also had a history of sexually abusing young women, including his own daughter, who claimed he had molested her. In 1987, he was charged with kidnapping and murdering 2 young girls who now remain missing. But as you heard him, he did spend a lot of time in jail because he was able to, he wasn't able to, he passed away because of a heart attack. But there is an article from the Oklahoman called Girl Tells of Escaping Man in Wyoming by Ray Robinson. Again, just citing the source. A year ago, a partially clothed teenage girl fled her home in Evansville, Wyoming, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to the emergence of Royal Russell Long as the suspect in the 1981 disappearance of 2 girls from the State Fair of Oklahoma. And yes, this article was written in 1985. Prosecutors charged Wednesday the similarities between the 2 cases essentially placed Long's imprint on the disappearance of Cindy L. Pallett and charged Charlotte Kinsey, whom Long is charged with killing after luring them from their fair with the promise of a $5 per hour job unloading stuffed animals. That does sound like something that a sex offender would come up with. But there are countless people who try to use this type of behavior and say that it is actually similar to that of the Zodiac killer. And the first one comes to mind is Lyndon Lafferty, who talked about his Zodiac killer suspect, William Joseph Grant. And he said that the Zodiac killer would have operated like this because his exact words were that William Joseph Grant was someone who would have the ability to lure a woman into his car, and she wouldn't normally get into a car with another man, but he puts her in that false sense of security, and partially ties into the fact that he was non-threatening because of his bisexual appearance. But Lafferty went on to explore this subject in his book by saying that the Zodiac was a sexually motivated serial killer. He wasn't someone who just killed purely because of calculation. He got sexual urges out of dominating women, even though he argued that Grant was primarily attracted to men, so that was a little bit confusing. Then Lafferty would go on to say that Grant was responsible for 41 murders, even more than the Zodiac killer's claimed number of 37. I just wanted to point out that those types of behaviors aren't solely tied to a sexual predator like Royal Russell Long, but they do come up in the Zodiac killer case. With Long's preliminary hearing on the murder and kidnapping charges in its 4th day, a 16-year-old South Dakota girl testified that Royal Russell Long offered her a ride and her 12-year-old friend as they hitchhiked on a Wyoming highway on September 19th of 1984. "We're going to get you guys some food and then take you back to the house so you can clean up and eat," she quoted Royal Long as telling the 2 girls. But then, after feeding them, Royal Russell Long offered them $100 to have sex with him and pulled a gun when she told him, "We're not those kind of girls." She said Long beat her friend, Sharon Bald Eagle, and then bound the 2 girls with a coat, hangers, and duct tape, and then raped them. The girl said that she escaped from Long's house as she slept and sought help from a neighbor, but she said she heard Long's pickup truck drive away as she waited for the police. But when the police searched the house, Bald Eagle and Royal Russell Long were gone. Like Pallett and Kinsey, prosecutors said that the Bald Eagle girl has not been seen since. Absolutely terrible, absolutely. They also presented testimony from Evansville police officer Steve Myram, who said that the FBI arrested Royal Russell Long 1 week later in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A search of his car revealed 2 stuffed animals, a green frog, and a pink snake with a bow tie. Long later pleaded guilty to the Wyoming kidnappings and was serving 2 life sentences in a state prison when the investigation of Pallett Kinsey disappearance focused on him. Summing up the testimony, District Attorney Robert Macy acknowledged that it did not directly implicate Long in the Oklahoma case, but he said, "It's important because it shows that Royal Russell Long is like this when he's with these young girls." Earlier Wednesday, forensic chemist Janice Davis of the Oklahoma City Police Department testified she found 4 scalp hairs matching the hair of Pallet in the trunk of Royal Russell Long, believed to have rented the truck around the time of the 1981 fair. While police do not have certain samples of Pallet's girl's hair, they used strands found from 2 of her brushes for comparison purposes. Davis said that the hair found in the car appeared to have been stuck to a mat after it had been painted over. So it does seem like this guy was a serial sex offender who was operating in different parts of the country. And did he also operate in Wyoming and Montana and Arizona, of course, talking about the murder of Carolyn Eaton, Valentine Sally? I think that that type of behavior is much more suggestive of him rather than the Zodiac killer, rather than any suspect, whether it's Arthur Lee Allen in the murder of Carolyn Eaton or Robert Volvins in the murder of Christy Gross. Because one particular detail that I'm noticing in this article is talks about how Royal Russell Long offered food to the girls before he tried to attack them, and with the murder of Carolyn Eaton, she was last seen alive at a diner where she was eating with a man who was much older than her, and the ZNN guys were proposing that that was Arthur Lee Allen. But, I mean, the Zodiac just seems so antisocial. That is he going to be having dinner with a young victim late at night and then taking her for a ride in his truck? I mean, first of all, the authorities seem pretty confident that Carolyn Eaton was murdered in the sleeper cab of a big rig. So what is Arthur Lee Allen doing with that? Or I mean, this definitely seems like Royal Russell Long would be a higher suspect for the Carolyn Eaton murder. And the sad fact is, because we do not have info on the other 3 victims in the Rollins Rodeo crimes, we should say, that it's very difficult to compose a profile. I mean, as stated, they believe they are homicides, but the victims haven't even turned up. But what do you think? Do you think that there's any possibility that these crimes could have been committed by the Zodiac killer? Do you think that Royal Russell Long is a better suspect? Or is he just being vilified the same way that Ted Bundy is, where you have a serial killer who operated in multiple states, so people are like, well, okay, it has to be Ted Bundy because he was operating in Colorado and Wyoming is near Colorado. I mean, it's true, Ted Bundy did approach women very differently than the Zodiac did. I mean, Ted Bundy would wear the fake cast on his arm and walk up to people and say he needs help moving something and lure them away under the false premise of being non-threatening, and then he would attack women. Whereas the Zodiac seems to be someone who is attacking people once he believes they are unable to fight back, but committing the crimes and getting away as quickly as possible, whereas Bundy is taking much more time with the victims. And there's also a sense of intimacy that is involved with the crimes by people like Ted Bundy and Royal Russell Long. I mean, definitely putting in way more effort binding the victims. That I mean, you heard those details about Royal Russell Long, that he was binding the victims with hangers, duct tape, and he's really trying to make sure that they're in a defenseless state. Whereas the Zodiac killer tied up victims at Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, but not in such an extravagant way. And no, I'm being very clear, Royal Russell Long is not a Zodiac suspect. He is a suspect in 2 possible Zodiac crimes, the murder of Valentine Sally and the murder of Christy Gross. But what do you think? Do you think there's any possibility that the Zodiac killer murdered Valentine Sally or Christy Gross? Put your ideas in the comment section down below. Now, I would like to go to a particular comment that was left on a recent episode talking about a different Zodiac suspect whom I discussed recently, and his name is Shel Cavale. But this came in on an older episode called Zodiac Shel Cavale AMA. Shel Cavale is the suspect of Mike Rodelli, author of In the Shadow of Mount Diablo, as well as The Hunt for Zodiac. And what Rodelli has claimed is that the Zodiac killer was actually a millionaire who was living a double life. Shel Cavale was a very accomplished businessman, but somebody left a comment that I read off in the AMA said that one of the reasons why Shel Cavalli should not be the Zodiac killer, or he shouldn't be viewed as a high-ranking Zodiac suspect, is because Shel Cavalli voluntarily offered a DNA sample, and the Zodiac killer most likely would do not, because the Zodiac couldn't be certain that he didn't leave any DNA behind. And a comment came in from Jace on the episode Shel Cavalli AMA, which reads, "After listening to the comments read on the show about why Cavalli can't be the Zodiac, all I could do is shake my head at how willfully in denial some people choose to be and how their tunnel vision blinds them to the evidence. The piece Rodelli wrote for the show, especially regarding Presidio Heights, was a strong indication of Cavalli's guilt." And if you'd like to hear that full response written by Mike Rodelli, who authored the majority of the text for that episode, you can hear it on Zodiac Shel Cavalli AMA. But I wanted to respond to this comment because about 2 weeks ago, I did an Anything Goes Friday segment on Anthony Emilia, the M25 rapist from the UK, and he was captured for that very reason that I was just discussing. He voluntarily gave a DNA sample when he didn't know if he had left DNA behind or not, and he was caught. He voluntarily gave a DNA sample when he was guilty, and he was caught, and he was convicted, and they said they had the evidence. Of course, Anthony Emilia's defense was that he thought that he was being framed and it was fabricated. I believe he confessed to one rape and abduction, but he did not confess to all of them. Most likely he was guilty, but I think that just goes to show you that sometimes people will offer a DNA sample if they are indeed guilty. So that's one of the comments that Jace was referring to about the reasons why Shel Cavalli couldn't be the Zodiac killer, and lots of other people have been talking about Zodiac suspects whom they have the DNA of. One of them is Donald Lee Cheney, who is the subject of the book, citing in on the Zodiac killer and the suspect of Drew Beeson, who also has a YouTube channel, and he does a show called The Zodcast, and Don Cheney, more or less, offered his DNA, and Don Cheney's DNA came back either as a non-match or inconclusive, but it is my understanding that Don Cheney wasn't officially exonerated because of DNA or handwriting or fingerprints, but he did offer those samples and he was not arrested. So people interpret that in two different ways. One interpretation is, well, maybe there was insufficient evidence to make any type of determination, and the other response, which comes from Tom Voigt, is that Don Cheney's forensic material did not match, therefore he should not be viewed as a high Zodiac killer suspect, and I've talked about that in several of the recent Zodiac news reports. You can also hear my book discussion on Citing In on the Zodiac Killer by Drew Beeson, available here on this channel. But I wanted to look at another comment. It came to us from Sandy Betts, talking about the Zodiac-Manson connection. The Zodiac-Manson connection is something that is authored by Howard Davis, who proposes that Bruce Davis, Charles Manson's right-hand man, was the Zodiac killer. There's no relation between Howard and Bruce. But I was talking about how there's a story that Howard Davis had a pristine source that talked about the discovery of the Lake Berryessa costume in the possession of Bruce Davis, and Sandy Betts wanted to offer a correction to that, and she writes, "Howard Davis's pristine source was related to Howard and was not supposed to tell anyone anything about Bruce Davis, so when Mike Butterfield questioned the pristine source, of course he wasn't going to admit that he told Howard about that. I happen to know Howard, and he is not making up anything at all about what he was told. The costume was not found. Only a black leather hood was found that belonged to Bruce Davis. I have my own suspects, so I don't believe Bruce Davis is the Zodiac killer." And yes, the word is used because Bruce Davis is still serving life in prison for his role in the Manson family murders. But I wanted to respond to this for two reasons. The first was to offer that correction to the story, and the second is that this goes to show you that people did own things like a leather hood, but might not be identical to the Zodiac's costume that he wore. Most people think that the Zodiac was wearing a cloth costume at Lake Berryessa, but it goes to show that these types of things, black hooded masks, black hooded costumes, they did exist. And they could have been in the possession of someone. And part of me really tends to think that it's possible the Zodiac killer already had the Lake Berryessa hood because of a similar reason. And the examples that I've talked about in the past are welders wearing a similar hood, firefighters wearing a similar hood, or maybe it was just some other type of costume that existed for a different reason. As we heard, Bruce Davis has a black leather hood in his own possession, which again is most likely not the Zodiac's, but people owned costumes. One point that I think is absolutely ridiculous comes to us from Jarrett Kobeck, author of Motor Spirit as well as How to Find Zodiac, and he proposes that it was a costume for a Renaissance fair, and that guy would have been the most plain, most boring, most ordinary, stand out like a black thumb in the daylight hours kind of costume that you would have seen at a Renaissance fair if that were indeed true. So I don't really know where Jared Kobeck is getting that other than making it up. But you can always share your thoughts and ideas about the Zodiac Killer's Lake Berryessa costume. And if you would like to hear more about the inspirations for that, I would invite you to check out the most recent episode on the channel that came out for the Moraga series called Zodiac Killer, the map that challenged the world, and you can hear about Spheria's observations on the Lake Berryessa costume. Now, I also would like to continue with something from last week, where I was talking about the possible Zodiac crime, the death of Pat Tan, and this is something that was shared to me once again by Bruce, who has been very helpful to the show, and it talked about how Pat Tan was found in her apartment and she was found hanging, but there were leaves in her hair as well as dirt and debris, and it seemed like a very odd way in which the suicide was taking place. And it appears that that was an error that was posted online because Pat Tan is a possible Zodiac victim that would have been committed by rope, tying back to by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And she was actually found in an outdoor setting. She was found outside hanging from a tree limb. And again, this is very different than the conventional Zodiac crimes, but some people point out to the Zodiac mailing by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire on the Halloween card, saying that he's going to change the way that his crimes are going to be committed, and they're not only going to be committed by gun or by knife, that he was also planning on committing a crime by fire, which could have been the attempted abduction of Kathleen Johns, setting her car on fire on March 22nd of 1970, and maybe a crime by rope such as the hanging of Pat Tan. But I would like to read the document from the investigation summary that was sent to me by Bruce, and it says, I was called to the area of Bootjack Camp, Mount Tamalpais, your RE a possible suicide. I arrived and was taken down into the canyon and up the other side to the locations of the body. This area was described as very steep. I observed, hanging from a tree limb with both feet on the ground, 2 electric cords and a white cotton rope, these being woven together around the neck. The body was in full rigor and lividly and was pronounced on legs. And lividity was pronounced on legs, excuse me. It appears that both feet had been under attack by insects and the flesh in the toes was missing. No other signs of trauma were noted other than deep rope marks around the neck, blowfly eggs noted in the corners of the eggs, a number of band-aids noted on the left hand and right leg. No other signs of external trauma noted. Body to Russell and Gooch on my order for autopsy. I mean, I think the only thing that would suggest that this had been a murder is the fact that there are band-aids treating some type of wounds, like if somebody is focused on healing and getting better and then they commit suicide. But that also might be just to avoid discomfort before the suicide was taking place. And when people are trying to connect a crime like this to the Zodiac case, which in all fairness to Bruce, he was not. He was just sharing a story about a possible Zodiac victim that I hadn't heard of before. I think that it's very very clear that this one was most likely a suicide by someone who was very troubled. And I mean, it's a hanging from a tree that was meant to have been a suicide that had took place in an uninterrupted way. Someone wanted to commit suicide alone in a natural area where they wouldn't be disturbed. And based on how the body was there for a while, I think all of those forms of decomposition were natural. I don't think that there was any abuse to the body. And that, again, also does not suggest a murder. I mean, you'd think that there would be much more signs of a struggle. We're talking about things like untreated cuts without a bandage on it, without band-aids on them. I think that there would be a lot more physical evidence suggesting that Pat Tan had died from a struggle rather than simply being involved in these types of injuries that look like a suicide. And in a little bit of a different tradition for the show, instead of just looking at comments from supporters on BuyMeACoffee.com, I would like to read one that came in on last week's Zodiac Killer News Report from the I messed that word up. It was from the Black Pill Behemoth. I almost said back pill. No, the Black Pill Behemoth, who says, "Hey Ned, two off-topic questions, if you don't mind. Number one, what is your ethnic background? And two, I noticed that you sport a beard and wear a head cap. Are you Muslim? If you're not comfortable answering, it's cool. Just wondering. Peace." And there is no problem asking me about that. To the first question, what is your ethnic background? I am half Algerian, half European mix. My mother was American, but had ancestry from all types of European backgrounds: German, French, Irish, Scottish, and all blended into one. There are probably even things that I don't know about. My grandmother insisted that we also had Spanish ancestry, so that's the reason why I look the way that I do. And yes, my father is Algerian, and I wear a very small beard, but no, I am not a Muslim. And when I wear a head cap, it is only to cover up some sebaceous cysts that I have on my head. And a lot of people ask me, like, why don't you go to the doctor and get them removed? And I said, well, what's the point in that? I already bought the bandana caps. So that's why I wear those. Absolutely not a religious thing, other than if you want to count improving someone's own well-being and free will as part of a religious experience. But the reason that I wanted to read this comment was also the name, the Black Pill Behemoth. Earlier this year on the channel, I talked about a crime that has been connected to the Black Pill movement. And because this is a Zodiac News Report plus true crime talk, I wanted to revisit the story of Jake Davison, the Plymouth shooter. And there is a very particular reason. As you guys know, I follow some channels that I talk about, such as John Anthony Lifestyle and Playing with Fire, and I learned about this story from them. That there's a YouTuber from the UK who is part of the Black Pill movement named Wheat Waffles, and the Black Pillars talk a lot about how your physical appearance is the most important thing when it comes to attracting a partner. If you do not meet a certain looks threshold, you will never get any responses on online dating sites, and that physical appearance is the most important, as well as they tie into some other things like hypergamy is very present in female behavior, but I don't think we even need to explore that too much. And there was somebody named Jake Davison who was using the YouTube name Professor Waffle, and he went on to commit a mass shooting in the UK. And I learned about the story from John Anthony Lifestyle and Playing with Fire, which is hosted by a guy named Alex V. And I keep hearing them telling variants of the story on their channels as they upload regularly, but they keep altering the details. And I'm like, I learned about this thing from you guys, and now you're saying that, oh yeah, there's this YouTuber named Wheat Waffles that talks about physical appearances, and some guy named Mr. Waffles committed a shooting in his honor. Or then they also say that Jake Davison was using the name Wheat Waffles himself, and that is doesn't seem to be true at all. And if it did happen, it is not to my knowledge. And by the way, the YouTuber from the UK the real Wheat Waffles gets that name because his real name is Sam Wheatley, and wheat waffles are an underrated food, mind you. Like, I love whole grain waffles, like, or just whole wheat kinds. I mean, anything that has dark grains in it. Whole wheat pancakes as well. Highly, highly underrated. But I digress from that because there's something that is more serious. What is the true story of what happened with this guy using the name Professor Waffle? And I would like to go to an article from mirror.co.uk that talks about what happened to the Plymouth shooter 1 year after Jake Davison's senseless spree. Jake Davison shot and killed 5 people in August of 2021 during the Plymouth shooting, having previously been referred to a counter-terrorism program by his mother. Davison had an obsession with involuntary celibate or incel culture, as well as a strong interest in guns. But what happened to Davison, and where is he 1 year on from the shooting? Well, I think that's a ridiculous question to ask. I mean, I'll tell you right now, he's dead. He committed suicide after the shooting. I don't know why they're introducing the subject that way. I guess they're trying to grab your attention. Davison, who was an apprentice crane operator, shot his mom following an argument, and then went on a killing spree in Keyham, Plymouth, killing Sophie Martin, her father Lee, Stephen Washington, and Kate Shepard. And no matter what, I'll say rest in peace to the victims now. The gunman's attack went on for a total of 12 minutes, and the incident took place just weeks after he got his shotgun and gun license back to him by the police after he assaulted 2 teenagers. Following Davison's rampage on Biddick Drive in Keyham, where he shot 4 victims, he headed to Henderson Place, where when he reached the road, he shot and fatally wounded 66-year-old Kate Shepard, telling a passing resident that there was nothing to worry about. Shortly after his killing spree, a passerby saw Davison walking and described him as walking like he was on patrol, like a soldier with a gun and a blank expression. At 6:23 p.m., Davison shot himself dead on Henderson Place. So yes, I again think that that's just a very bizarre way they introduce, well, where is he now? I mean, he passed away immediately after the shooting, so I think they just wanted a little bit of clickbait, and I wish the mainstream media wouldn't do that, but they constantly will. In an inquest of the shooting, it was found that Davison had been referred to a prevent scheme, which is something that aims to stop individuals from being radicalized as terrorists, by his mother Maxine. It was revealed that Davison had been hooked on porn and had an obsession with guns from a young age. Prior to his death, Davison described himself as a Terminator and a fucking fat ugly virgin and an incel, slang for involuntary celibate, in an online rant about mass shootings and his sexual frustration. After the Plymouth shooting, it was also revealed that he had raged at an autistic man in Plymouth City Center for carrying a support doll just weeks before his murder. And that sentence was a little bit confusing. They mean after the shooting took place, they learned this information, but the event where he got angry at an autistic man for carrying a support doll took place before the shooting in the weeks prior. Following the tragedy, a vigil was held to commemorate the victims of the attack, with hundreds gathering to show their respects. There is now a candlelight vigil planned on August 12th, this is an old article, at North Down Crescent Park at 7 p.m. to mark the anniversary of the shooting. But if you would like to hear more about that one, you can go to the episode on this channel, Professor Waffle, the Plymouth shooter. And somebody responded to that comment, to that episode, by saying, "You are giving a platform to this mass shooter, please do not do that." And my simple response is, this is a true crime channel where I talk about crimes, and I openly say that all of these murderers are wrong. The Zodiac killer was wrong. Royal Russell Long was wrong. Jake Davison, the Plymouth shooter, was wrong. And 100% of the blame goes on the shooter himself. He is completely responsible, and it looked like he had some very intense mental health issues that were getting out of control, and they even tried to prevent some of them. As you heard, his mother tried to put him in this diversion program, so to speak, and they were unsuccessful. But as far as giving him a platform, what did this person think, that Jake Davison was going to hear my episode on BlackBoxOnlineRadio and think, hey, this guy's talking about me in a positive light? No, he's not going to hear the episode. Why? Because, as I've said numerous times now, he's dead. He killed himself after the shooting, and secondarily, I absolutely condemn every ounce of that type of behavior, and if anybody would think there's an ounce of glorification for any of the criminals discussed on this show, no, they are doing immoral things. They are doing heinous and selfish and disgusting self-serving things, and they know this, and they know this. And with somebody like Jake Davison, he was a very deranged individual, and he was someone who may have had influences that he would have used to justify his crimes, but his primary function was he wanted to commit crimes without getting caught. He was sexually frustrated and didn't know how to deal with that. So he chose to respond in a destructive way. He chose to unleash his frustrations on society and commit suicide so he wouldn't be punished for the crimes. He was completely wrong. And yes, he may have discussed things on incel forums and black pill forums, but you can't even blame those people because they didn't put the gun in his hand. They didn't tell him to kill anyone. I doubt that the YouTuber Wheat Waffles even knew that much about this guy. I'm almost certain that I saw Wheat Waffles discussing a photo of Jake Davison in a previous episode, and I didn't even know who he was at the time, but once I saw the photos of the Plymouth shooter, then I recalled it from a live stream that was done. I think that was actually on the Playing with Fire channel, but doesn't matter. You cannot blame the content creator who is simply talking about how, well, these are the chart results from online dating sites and this is how women choose their preference, and then some guy is going to read something like that or listen to something like that or watch a video like that and go out and commit a mass shooting. And there's a little bit more to the story, of course. You can hear more about that in my extended episode. Jake Davison was also very upset with his mother because she was more or less taking advantage of some money that should have been directed to him because of disability. And again, I don't even want to get into that right now because there are all types of reasons that I can talk to you about why the Plymouth shooting occurred, about why mass shootings occur, but you blame the criminal. And most likely, Jake Davison knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't experiencing some type of episode when he did not know right from wrong because he committed certain actions so he would not be held accountable, so he would not face punishment for the crimes. And as horrible as that sounds, that's what I believe he was doing. So I think that that's where we have to leave it at that. You do not just blame some series of videos or forums that people have online. There are pre-existing mental conditions that lead people to commit these types of crimes. So you can respond in the comment section down below if you want. And I would like to thank the supporters, the Black Bill Behemoth, for answering those questions, as well as Batman66 for a donation and contribution, as well as all of the other shoutouts I have to give to Batman for sending me the card, as well as the book Secrets with Ciphers and Codes. But what do you think about any of the subjects discussed in this episode? Please write something in the comments section. You can always hit the like button, subscribe, visit the books on Amazon.com, Killer on a White Horse, Down the Dark Lane, and anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.